Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I'm going to talk about the prologue of Dust of Dreams, book 9 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erikson. Now, ordinarily, when I discuss prologues, I typically go through some of the elements that reveal to us a tone or an atmosphere that is being evoked, plot threads that are being signaled and are going to be developed in the book, or something in that prologue that is signaling to us what the book is going to be about. Slightly different this time. In the last section of the prologue, by the way, this is spoilers just for the prologue of Dust of Dreams. And in discussing this point, I'm actually just discussing an aspect of extradiegetic or metadiegetic metatextual information that's being given to the reader. That this is not going to reveal anything about the actual text. So there are no spoilers for Dust of Dreams, but I am going to talk about the sort of last section of the prologue. And the reason this is so interesting, in previous discussions with Stephen Erikson, he's referred to Toll the Hounds as the cipher of the series. Ruth and Bad has obviously made arguments that Cotillion is the cipher of the series, that he has all of these different theories. And, you know, I think Ruthven just likes ciphers. But there is something in the last section of the prologue that I think is a very strong and overt articulation of a technique that applies to how to understand the Malazan Book of the Fallen, how to understand it as a series, how to understand and how to read the Malazan Book of the Fallen in the way that the author intended. And I know that a lot of people think that authorial intent does not matter. But if a book is intended for a 5-year-old to read, if it is intended for a child to read, you would not have the same expectations that you would for a Victorian novel that was intended for adults to read. The language would be different. The style of narrative would be different. A lot of the content would be different. Authorial intent does matter. It is not overriding everything else, but authorial intent does matter. And when an author structures work in such a way to go, this is what I am doing, it is very useful to understand that intention, because it can correct a lot of misapprehensions that we have about the text. It can help us read the text more accurately, and it can actually stop us misreading aspects of the text or misunderstanding what is happening. So the section I want to look at is in the last part of the prologue. And again, not going into any details that are going to reveal aspects of plot or character or anything like that. It's just this one element. So let me read through. I've extracted 2 paragraphs. So let me read through the first one. There were patterns and they demanded consideration. The elements remained disarticulated, however, in floating tendrils, in smears of loose black-like stains swimming in his vision. But at least he could now see, and that was something. The rotted cloth had pulled away from his eyes, tugged by currents he could not feel. The key to unlocking everything would be found in the patterns. He was certain of that. If only he could draw them together, he would understand. He would know all he needed to know. He would be able to make sense of the visions that tore through him. Now, the reason I've extracted this, yes, there is a diegetic reason and an explanation for this information that corresponds directly to events and characters within the text, but I'm not going into that. What I'm going into is why I think that this is a glimpse at something that Erikson, myself, and Philip Chase have discussed repeatedly, which is when we consider the Malazan Book of the Fallen, a common complaint is, oh, well, he just introduces new characters. Oh, it's a new setting. Oh, this doesn't go anywhere. And each time when Philip and I have been discussing it, we've been pointing out thematic connections. We've been pointing out that while two narrative events or character arcs or narrative trajectories do not appear to be linked in terms of a causal link, in terms of a direct impact, in terms of action, quite often they are extraordinarily closely linked in terms of a theme that is being explored. They are symbolically linked, that there is an aspect that joins the two of them together very, very closely. And I think that is part of what is being articulated here in the prologue of Dust of Dreams. There were patterns and they demanded consideration. The elements remained disarticulated, however. So if we consider, when we have been reading through the Malazan Book of the Fallen, we have had 8 books. We seem to have all of these different pieces of a puzzle, and we don't quite know how they are all going to fit together. We don't have a projection of what it is ultimately going to look like, the way that we would with a jigsaw puzzle. Like, here's the picture. This is, we're going to find out how they all clip together. And in fact, unlike a lot of other more traditional narratives, it hasn't been clearly signaled where the story is going, where the narrative is going. And therefore, we are left in a state of uncertainty as to how do these pieces link. I don't know what is an important piece. I don't know what is just a background piece. And I think one of the things that is being articulated here is, if we consider narrative being like a river, that the start of the river is the start of the narrative, and then it flows and it has a meandering course and it eventually ends at a destination. But that course will twist and bend. And sometimes there are obvious things that make it twist and bend. We can see the landscape around. It is a very clear surface level detail. And those would be a lot of the narrative events, character actions. That's the easy thing to pick up just by looking at the surface of the river and the surrounding land. There we go. But upon closer inspection of the narrative, this river, we notice that there are eddies, there are swirls, there are currents, there are areas where we can see the water bulging, where we can see the water developing that sort of white foam because it's flowing quickly, and there are submerged rocks, there are hidden terrain details. And these things have a direct impact on the narrative. They are creating these swirls. And these hidden rocks, these hidden landscape features within the narrative, these are the themes and the concepts, the symbols, all of those aspects that frequently we don't consider when we think about narrative, because we are so used to and trained to now to expect everything to be delivered on a surface level, that it's just the surface level details. We are going from A to Z, we're going to go through these different locations, and that's where we're going to end up. We have that expectation. But here we're being explicitly told that the patterns are important. They demand consideration. And while they may look like they are disarticulated, that they are not connected, if we can understand those patterns, we can see how the ripples in one area affect the ripples in another area. And these ripples are being caused by hidden elements. These hidden elements are themes and concepts. And it is only through the articulation of them, the patterns that they have created, that we understand how everything fits together. So like Paul on the road to Damascus, the scales fell from his eyes. What we're being told about here, there were patterns and they demanded consideration. At least he could now see, and that was something. We are now aware of a lot of these different elements. And the key to unlocking everything would be found in the patterns. He was certain of that. If only he could draw them together, he would understand. He would know all that he needed to know. And this is what the last two books are building toward. The first 8 books have established key themes, key concepts, key abstracts. They have put all of the different pieces in place for this conclusion. They have armed us, they have forewarned us, they have given us foreknowledge of what are these big pieces that we need to understand. Even if at the beginning of book 9, we still don't quite know how they are all going to fit together. But what we are being told here, what we're being reassured about is, yes, there are patterns, there is a reason. And while they may appear disarticulated, while they may appear disconnected, there are actually points of connection between them. They will fit together and it will make sense. He would be able to make sense of the visions that tore through him once he understands the patterns. So that is a big aspect of this. And if we then look at the second paragraph, I sort of extracted from this. If he could but draw close the fragments, make the mosaic whole, and so comprehend the truth of the patterns. If he could, swirls, yes, they are that. The motion does not deceive. The motion reveals the shape beneath. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. That up until now, we have had all of these pieces. And now, as we get closer to the end, if we pay attention, not just to the event, not just to, oh, well, that character did that, that led to that, and think of causal links of events and character actions. But if we actually think of the patterns being established, it is the patterns that are going to reveal the truth of the entire picture, not the surface level elements. The surface level elements are affected by these patterns. The surface level elements are what are created by the swirl and undercurrent and subtext and concepts that are being articulated. So that is the main point about this thing that I wanted to discuss. But now, because that's completely spoiler free, but now in terms of some spoiler information, and this is only going to be spoiler information for the earlier books, pre-book 9. When we think of events that have occurred in Tull the Hounds, people quite frequently point at what happens to Nimander and his sort of group as they travel and go, but this has nothing to do with Darujhistan. And yet when we think of Nimander, if we understand that Nimander is a way to explain and explore Anomander, that it's about those concepts. So rather than giving us Anomander's early life and his exploits and who he was, we explore that through a symbolic link through Nimander. When we think of the chain of dogs and the travel that they went on across this huge part of the continent, and then in House of Chains, when the bone hunters retrace those steps, we have mirroring of aspects. We have these symbolic links between things. It's not repetition, it is reiteration and re-examination. When we have sections about the Sengar brothers and what they go through, and they are contrasted with the Bedict brothers and what they go through, when we see the treatment of motherhood or the treatment of family or brothers or all of these different aspects, when we understand that it is not solely about the surface level points of connection, it is actually about the conceptual points of connection and how they fit together. And it is very, very difficult. We have an expectation, wrongly, as it usually is, that a series should be X, that it should be a sequence of causally linked events, that these events are involving actors of various types, heroes, antagonists, protagonists, villains, that these events will build toward a conclusion. That is an expectation that we have, and that every book in the series will build on the previous books. That is an expectation that we have, despite the fact that there are multiple series that do not do this. The Chronicles of Narnia do not do this. The culture novels do not do this. Even Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, people now read them entirely out of publication sequence and create new mini groupings within them of the Witches books or the City Watch books. And they do that because there is a desire for, here's an event here, and the same characters are now in another event here, and the same characters in another event here, and there's a progression of time, and it is logical. But that's not how the Discworld was created. That's not how Pratchett approached building the world or building the series. That's not how he did it. That things were shown out of sequence. They involved completely different characters. They were set in different parts of the world, and we just read them. So there's a misapprehension about what series means. And I think this is a note that the narrator of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is giving to the reader, reminding us that so much of what has gone before, when we think of the arc of Crocus and how that can be linked to other people's arcs within Gardens of the Moon, where we can compare and contrast Crocus with Sorry, with Lorne, with Tattersail, when we look at Tattersail and Lorne, when we find these characters where we have this wonderful, they are two sides of the same coin. And it's through the exploration of them that we get a better idea of a concept, that we get exploration of it. That when we see all of these different sequences, when in Dead House Gates, we are told about the Cull of the Nobles. And that actually is directly linked to the Cull of the Nobles that Dujek opposed at Pale. And the culling of nobles, the infiltration of nobles into the army, is a sequence that repeats throughout the novels. And then when we get to Hellion, going through Lethras, where Hellion executes people when they arrive in a village, that we see these are all different aspects of the same thing. We might not think that Dujek opposing Tayshrin in the culling of nobles in Pale has anything to do with Lysine's cull of nobles in Unta, or Hellion's killing of moneylenders in Lethras. But these are all extensions of the same concept. They are all talking about the same thing. And when we start seeing it in terms of patterns, when we start seeing it in terms of the eddies and ripples and actions that are surrounding it, that we start to see a bigger picture, that we've been so focused on the surface level details that we have lost sight of the overall pattern of what is happening. And that section of the prologue, I think, helps remind us that that is what this author intended, at least partially, about their book, about their series, about this narrative that they have created, that Erikson has done this very, very deliberately from the start. And now that we're getting to the end, we have all of these pieces, and now it's about how these pieces are going to fit together. But I'd be interested to know whether or not you think I'm talking out of my bum on this one. But I honestly think that this is actually important, and it spells it all out to us. And I think understanding this is a key to understanding the entire series. It's not a cipher in the same way of explaining what the series is doing. This is a key to understanding how the series is doing it. Your mileage may vary, but thank you very much for watching. Thank you so much for your continued support. It means an incredible amount to me. And I will see you in the next one.